The capillaries in my eyes are bursting. If our love died, would that be the worst thing? Somebody I thought was my savior, you sure make me do a whole lot of labor. The callous skin on my hands is cracking. If our love ends, would that be a bad thing? And the silence haunts our bedchamber. You make me do too much labor.
Patriarchy being the basis for most of Western society means that men being seen as the default isn't just the norm, it's so normalized that even things we don't consider patriarchal are discriminatory. Don't believe me? The 9-to-5 workday is sexist. No, this is not hyperbole. The 9-to-5 workday isn't just a capitalist burden we all face, it also unfairly favours men. As Sydney Good points out in their article in Top Doctor magazine,
in addition to a normal circadian rhythm, men also experience a diurnal rhythm of testosterone. That means they experience the same thing every day with their hormones. When testosterone levels are normal, testosterone is at its highest in the morning and decreases over the day. As men sleep, testosterone rises, so it's at its peak again the next day. In other words, they're ready to seize the day in the morning and feel ready to clock out by the end of the day. And the same thing repeats every single day. Hypothetically, women should feel the same way based on their circadian rhythms. However, any woman knows she doesn't feel the same each day, and it's not just in her head. That's because a woman's cycle works on a roughly 28-day pattern. A woman's key hormones, progesterone and estrogen, dramatically shift over this time. The main events in a woman's cycle are ovulation and menstruation, but the body's hormones are still working in between these points. All that to say, a woman will feel energized and have more mental clarity to complete tasks at specific points during the month. But at other times, she'll feel grateful if she just makes it out of bed.
So men work best on a 24-hour cycle, and women work best in different weeks of the month. I know for a fact that for at least 2 days out of the month, I am basically bedridden, or on a whole lot of intense painkillers, or with a TENS machine strapped to me. Sometimes all three. The reason I own a TENS machine is actually that I was once at work and had cramps so bad, I went to the chemist on my break and spent £80 on one, and then wore it for the rest of the day, repeatedly tucking the wires back under my apron so I wasn't a workplace health and safety hazard. I did that instead of just, I don't know, going home. Men, if you got repeatedly kicked in the dick over and over again, would you persist until your shift was over with very little assistance? Or do you think you might take the afternoon off to ice your balls and recover? I know what some of you will say you do, and I know from experience what a lot of you are like suffering from the common cold, so maybe consider it twice before answering. I think every man should have to be strapped to a TENS machine on full power for 2 days before he's legally allowed to vote on women's issues. And I live by that. So if the workplace was set up accounting for disparities in gender, women should be given a more adaptable schedule because we can be extremely productive on some days and far less productive on others, amounting to the same amount of work achieved by men over their 9-to-5 schedule. If men think this sounds unfair, imagine having to work on days where you know you're going to be less productive, or you're literally bleeding out of your taint, while watching people who do not suffer these monthly issues act as though they are more productive every day by virtue of their efforts and not a system designed to give them a leg up. Ooh, who's the real DEI now? Conservatives who hate it when poor people get handouts should be all over this injustice. We obviously can't leave the topic of workplace discrimination without talking about the whole women are too emotional to be good leaders rhetoric.
I wonder if the government should return to the gold standard. I think it should. Good. Then we're all agreed.
I think the government should stay off the gold standard so that the pound can reach a level that will keep our exports competitive.
The lady has foolishly attempted to join the conversation with a wild and dangerous opinion of her own. What half-baked drivel. See how the men look at her with utter contempt.
Daphne, we're going home.
Women, know your limits.
You can't have a woman president. What if she PMSs too hard and accidentally hits the big red button? Never mind that literally almost every single war in history has been started and perpetuated by men. Never mind that Trump trying to have a dick measuring contest with world leaders almost led to another war overnight. Never mind that women are taught to manage and nurture and express their feelings healthily from a young age, and men are raised to suppress all of their emotions until they punch a hole in the drywall. Just a quick reminder that anger is an emotion, boys, no matter how masculine it makes you feel. Maybe if you cried once in a while, you might actually achieve world peace. Not all men. I didn't forget, but I know more than one person popped into your head when I listed off those examples, whether from history or your own life experience. Am I wrong? The most obvious rebuttal to the idea that men are better at leading is that, well, They aren't. Even when women are specifically set up to fail, a la the glass cliff.
The glass cliff describes the idea that when a company is in trouble, a female leader is put in charge to save it. When women are finally given a chance to prove themselves in a senior position, they are handed something that is already broken, and where the chances of failure are high.
Research done during the pandemic demonstrated that female leaders handled the crises better than their male counterparts, including the number of fatalities. They also outscored in 13 of the 19 competencies in the assessment of leadership effectiveness, and roughly matched them in 5 more. The only category that men outranked women in was technical or professional expertise. But, quote, the difference was not statistically significant. Sure, there are the occasional Liz Trusses who are about as effective as a wet paper bag. But comparing her to the entire history of male UK Prime Ministers makes her look a whole lot better, considering that David Cameron greenlit a Brexit vote because he thought it wouldn't go through, and then when it did, promptly resigned. Harold Wilson's devaluation that led to Nixon's gold standard adjustment, and Boris Johnson's everything. Men aren't just the default leaders in society, though. They're also seen as the default protagonist of stories. Whether books, movies, or video games, if you use a female protagonist, that IP is now just for girls. Or worse. It's the woke leftist lib-cut commies trying to ruin everything. Of course, there are exceptions to this rule, and I'm sure you're all typing furiously to list them off. Please do, it helps my engagement. Also like and subscribe. And I also love finding new things to watch and read and play, so get to typing. But don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. Harry Potter is for everyone. But before the widely loved movies, the Hunger Games series was marketed mainly towards women, which is weird, because Hunger Games is distinctly darker and more political. But because Katniss Everdeen is a girl, it was seen as more of a female-centric property. Before the films came out, the original covers featured female faces. And then, during the first movie's release, they repackaged them to be more neutral. Don't get me wrong, I love the new covers. They're beautiful, but that was a choice. Same goes for entire genres. Action movies are enjoyed by women almost as much as men, and in some cases, more. But because they're boy movies, they're seen as multi-quadrant films. Same goes for video games, by the way.
And not only was much of the audience female, many of the developers were too. Among the stars of early game design were Atari's Carol Shaw, Centipede creator Donna Bailey, and Roberta Williams, an adventure game pioneer and company co-founder, whose King's Quest series was a massive hit among gamers of all stripes. When it came time to market the original Nintendo Entertainment System, Nintendo devised a plan. Instead of selling it in the electronics section, they sold it in the toy aisle. But by then, the toy aisle was completely separated into pink and blue, boy and girl. Nintendo had to choose a side. They went with boy, and then they marketed to those boys relentlessly.
What's it like to play the Nintendo Entertainment System? Now you're playing with power.
Other brands soon followed suit.
Introducing Game Gear from Sega that separates the men from the boys.
And kept marketing to them as they grew up. And after decades of this kind of advertising,
what's up, bitch?
We now think of video games as being the exclusive domain of the male sex. More adult women play video games than teenage boys do.
Sweet.
Saying they're for just one gender is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's like saying movies are just for girls or books are just for dads.
Whereas rom-coms center female desire, on the whole, and so are almost exclusively marketed towards women, and are therefore seen as lesser, and often mocked by men. And men who do engage with the genre are mocked in turn. Romance isn't inherently a female thing. Men, if lucky, should also experience romance at some point in their lives, if that's something they want. So why have we labeled these stories as just for girls? Chick lit is seen as so lesser within the book publishing industry that multiple authors have called out as being marketed that way can actually restrict their readership. While women are known to read books about and by both men and women, and everything in between, men are much less likely to pick up a girl book. Male-centered or marketed books usually have neutral covers, or at the very least, interesting choices, while anything labeled as chick lit is usually given pastels, unconfrontational imagery, usually centering a woman or a couple, and most men will tell you it would be embarrassing for them to be caught dead reading it. Kids' books that have bridged the divide between so-called girl books and boy books, such as Skullduggery Pleasant and Artemis Fowl, have done so by clever marketing towards boys. Valkyrie is the main character of the Skullduggery Pleasant series, but it is not named after her, and she is never alone on the cover of the book until much later on. Artemis Fowl is named after its male protagonist, but splits half its POV with Holly Short, a female fairy. These books, by being marketed as boy books, or multi-quadrant books, and both written by men, have managed to ingeniously encourage boys to read from the perspective of female protagonists, without making them feel lesser for reading chick lit. Same goes for Percy Jackson. Joanne Rowling, evil bitch that she is, deliberately chose a gender-neutral name and centered a male protagonist because she knew it would sell more books. Once Harry Potter was over, she then took on an explicitly male moniker to sell more books, because not only does she subscribe to gender essentialism, but so does the world around us. All of which is perfectly acceptable and has been done by women across history, a la George Eliot, and Jane Austen simply signing her books off as written by a woman. But Joanne has continuously hit out at trans people for living their internal lives externally, while she exclusively uses gender as a disguise. Maybe that's why she does it, because she's never lived authentically in her life. I should probably cut that. Probably won't. Because they've been the default for most of the history of Western storytelling, men are rarely, if ever, asked to relate to a female perspective. So a lot of them will outright refuse to try, as to them, it's an effort to engage with other perspectives when there are a million other stories that are catered to them. This applies to the idea of protagonists of color, queer main characters and plot lines, and anything else that incel Twitch streamers scream about in their echo chambers.
Sorry, did you want to get immersed in our world? Yeah, well, guess what? Fucking pronouns!
I've also already talked extensively about how most things that men considered to be elite male content and the peak of male ingenuity and creation now were spearheaded by a fan base made up of largely women, which only became male-centric once it was already popular, a la Star Trek and the Beatles, Elvis. Moving away from media, let's go even more basic and talk about gender presentation. No, don't leave. I'm not going to turn you trans. That's what this essay is for. We know there's a difference between girl clothes and boy clothes. Largely because every time we see a man wear girl clothes, it's a sign of the apocalypse. Because male clothes are the default. For example, when women want to look androgynous, they would have to dress like men. Whereas when men project androgyny, they can wear either and still be successful. In fact, if they wear female-presenting clothes, it's often considered less androgyny and more drag. That is because women's clothing is designed to accentuate our bodies, while male clothes do that significantly less. To appear androgynous, women have to put on an average men's outfit. But for men to appear androgynous, they can simply tailor their already existing clothes. Giving themselves a waist, either by taking in a suit or putting on a corset, projects androgyny while still keeping their wardrobe almost entirely masculine. And if you don't believe me, Google androgynous clothes right now. Oh wait. Or better yet, go read any of Derek the Benzo Guy's posts about male fashion, and you start to realize that our understanding of innate male style is actually extremely off base. Andrew Tate is wearing women's suit jackets. Plus, female sizing is completely ass backwards and confusing, while men's clothes sizing is fairly consistent across the board. And let's not even get into the lack of pockets in girls' clothes. Yes, that is also a byproduct of patriarchy. Like I said, it's so baked into the fabric of society that even the most innocuous things, once you pull aside the curtain...
Oh! Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain!
...are revealed to be born out of putting men first. And speaking of customs, with men as the default, let's talk about Freemasonry. No, sorry, let's talk about single-gender spaces and Freemasonry. In Tasmania this year, Kersha Kashala created a female-only gallery titled The Ladies' Lounge at Mona. It featured works by famous artists, and entry was gatekept by gender. This led to Jason Lau filing an anti-discrimination suit against her and Mona because he was denied entry on the basis of gender, which he deemed discriminatory. Kashala herself responded to it with enthusiasm, saying, "The men are experiencing Ladies' Lounge. Their experience of rejection is the artwork. Okay, they experience the artwork differently than women, but men are certainly experiencing the artwork as it's intended." She embraced the court proceedings with open arms and absorbed it into the wider tapestry of the Ladies' Lounge, even adding a performance element on her way into court. During the back and forth, she even converted the lounge into a bathroom to make the point even clearer. She eventually won her appeal in September, and in his ruling, The judge stated,
"The Ladies' Lounge can be seen as an arrangement to promote equal opportunity by highlighting the lack of equal opportunity, which gradually prevails in society by providing women with a rare glimpse of what it is like to be advantaged rather than disadvantaged by the refusal of entry to the Ladies' Lounge by men."
Men arguing that it's gender discrimination not to be allowed into one gallery exhibit is funny, largely because Freemasonry has existed for hundreds of years and still exists today. I drove past one this afternoon. Freemasons are the oldest fraternal organization in the world, which means that they're a male-only club. Women were allowed to participate in a limited capacity from the 1800s onward, but only at the behest of their male relatives or husbands. While there have been female branches instituted in Europe and Australia, and even some mixed groups even share lodges and halls, American Freemasonry remains strictly a boys' club, and women aren't allowed into Masonic halls. Women also aren't allowed on World Heritage sites like Mount Athos in Greece, Mount Omine and Okinoshima Island in Japan, and various holy locations across Asia. But yeah, being kept out of one gallery is discrimination. That's for sure. A message posted onto Australia's longest-running gay bar, the Lead, says, "Used to go to leather pride meetings here in the 90s and stick around for a while after before heading to the glass house down the road. Such a formative experience. Now it's men only, and it makes me sad." There are no exclusively lesbian bars in Australia, and there's maybe one or two in England. Wet on Wellington, a gay sauna in Melbourne, is definitely not the first sauna to be gender exclusive, and it won't be the last. South Korea has hundreds of traditional saunas divided down gendered lines, called chimchulbang. Mixed and gendered chimchulbang are commonly open 24 hours, and some offer places to sleep overnight. South Korean men are known to utilize this when working away from home or after staying out drinking. Having gender-specific locations in spas and saunas makes a lot of sense, especially because they're the kind of location a person is vulnerable without their usual clothes or belongings. It should be easy to defend that choice, and yet in Australia, Wet on Wellington manages to fumble it completely, defending their gender exclusion by using weird manosphere language and being transphobic.
Wet on Wellington states that it has always been a welcoming, safe and inclusive place for cis males. I'm unsure of what threat the cis male-only sauna imagines when pointing to its inbuilt safety. Statistically speaking, a cis male-only space won't protect me from sexual harassment or abuse. Statistically speaking, a cis male-only space won't protect me from violence or drink tampering.
In the society we live in currently, men are entitled to their same-sex spaces the same as women, but it seems that men complain about women's spaces more than women complain about men's. When men complained about female-only gyms, implemented largely for safety reasons, they seemingly forgot that male-only gyms also existed because they don't actually want single-sex spaces. They just don't want women to have them. Their single-sex spaces are normal to them because they've never had to think twice about it. Not all men. I just thought I'd get that one in. It's been a minute. As Dejan points out in his article, the biggest danger to cis men is cis men, which, coincidentally, is also the biggest danger to trans men, trans women, and cis women. To be clear, I think that single-sex spaces can be positive, but you do have to be mindful not to let the ideology stray too far into turfism. Even the Freemasons allow trans men in now. Trans and non-binary people also belong in safe spaces, and excluding them from them because they don't conform to the standards we've set for female or male presentation is divisive and hostile. As pointed out in the Ladies' Lounge case, minorities creating sanctuaries and spaces for themselves is something protected under the law, and if we start cracking down on every small club or gathering with a demographic, we'd also have to get rid of all of those male-only spaces too. No more fraternities or sororities, no more gender-exclusive clubs and bars, no more Freemasons, no more Knights of Columbus, no more incel forums. We'll have to start dividing every workforce straight down the middle, making sure they're 50% women in order to avoid them becoming boys' clubs. So that's Parliament, cops, and construction to start with. No businesses with only women either, to be fair and balanced.
But to be balanced and fair, but mostly balanced, but also fair again in order to balance things out, which I guess would add an extra balance and make me more balanced than fair, and therefore not as balanced as I hope, and I apologize.
I think that also means only non-binary people should be allowed to be in charge from now on. Donald Trump has to use they-them pronouns now. I don't make the rules. It sounds silly, doesn't it? It's easy to go too far on one side or the other of the argument, making turf arguments to support separating the genders, and making completely unrealistic thought experiments in the opposite direction where gender both doesn't matter and matters the most because we can't let it tilt the scales on either side.
How is gender expression policed? What markers and characteristics do our literal gatekeepers lean into when making their judgments? Is self-identification enough, or must we perform our gender in a way that satisfies the cultural undercurrent of the space? What relevance do male-only spaces hold at a time when many reject the binary altogether? There are discernible ways of curating a space that signal an intended clientele without introducing exclusionary door policies, but to discriminate on the basis of perceived gender, or worse, genitals, only reinforces the fibers of cis-male supremacy that run rampant through every institution. To discriminate on these bases only confirms the broader societal entitlement of men to spaces, bodies, and the privileged right to experience both in the siloed parameters we demand.
Catering the world exclusively to the blueprint that is straight cis white men has created a culture that rejects any kind of diversity unless it meets those men's standards, i.e. doesn't take up too much space, or is fought tooth and nail for with protests. I appreciate and respect Marx's point here that we need to be kinder to men because touting all men suck rhetoric is only going to push them further right. But there's only so far that respect can stretch. Because as Kristen Chirico astutely points out, there is no time in human history where women gained rights because we were all really nice to men. How do you think we gained suffrage? Some suffragettes organised arson campaigns, which I don't condone. I don't like any violence. But oppressed classes don't have a lot of options. Women died. Women are still dying because we're not recognised as equal to men in so many ways. The 19th Amendment was passed in 1920, 2 years after the end of World War I, in which women stepped up to help the war effort. Our wages are worse, and whether you subscribe to the studies that say it's because we're discriminated against deliberately, or you prefer the studies that say it's because maternity leave skews the numbers, either way, we're statistically worse off. The United States and Papua New Guinea are the only two countries in the world without law enshrining paid parental leave. In America, the protections extend up to 12 weeks of unpaid maternity or family leave. The UK allows up to 52 weeks of maternity leave, 39 of which you could be eligible for statutory maternity pay. Men receive 1 to 2 weeks. Shared parental leave and pay is able to be divided by the parents however they like. With up to 50 weeks of leave, 37 of those paid. In Australia, you can take up to 22 weeks, and parental leave pay is calculated against the national minimum wage. So at the moment, it's roughly $915.80 per 5-day week, before taxes. Saudi Arabia is currently in the process of extending theirs from 10 to 12 weeks. Fully paid. And yes, a lot of that stems from the misogynistic ideal that women should be the ones staying home to take care of their kids. Is any of that perfect? No. If you're a father in Saudi Arabia, you only get 5 paid days to spend with your wife and new baby. In fact, in most countries, paternity leave is drastically underrepresented and underpaid. On the one hand, this makes sense. The woman has just gone through a huge medical procedure and needs at least 4 to 6 weeks to recover. On the other hand, why shouldn't he be home with her? Why don't we expect men to tap in after a certain period of weeks and then trade off periodically? You know, parenting. Women are pressured to settle down and have children basically from the moment we hit our teen years. But then we get out into the world and the lack of maternity pay, lack of paternity leave, and the attitude towards gaps in resumes due to time off to raise children all hugely affect our decisions to have kids. This creates a job market that favors men and punishes women for having children, despite it supposedly being our biological duty or whatever. So we either have to choose between having children and throwing a wrench into our careers or life plans, or our literal health, or refusing to have children and being ostracized because women are supposed to have kids. When I tell people I don't want kids of my own, I have to field additional questions. I have to discuss my medical history, my emotional history, my financial reasoning. Oftentimes, even with all of that, the conversation only comes to a close when the other person says something along the lines of, "You'll change your mind eventually." When my male friends say they don't want kids, it's usually met with a shrug. Women carry a child for 9 months. We go through childbirth, and it becomes our assumed identity the moment it's visible to others. In Korea, once they've had children, women are commonly referred to as such and such's mother. Not by their own name, not even by fucking ma'am or ajima or something. If I give birth to a son called Karam in Korea, I'm not Talis anymore. I'm Karam Yoma.
Everyone back in Korea called my mom Jinoma, meaning Jinu's mom. And actually back in Korea, all my friends' moms were called like this. Minoma, Yurioma, Jaesangoma, and that was their names basically. Only once in Canada, everyone called my mom by her name, and she finally wasn't just Jinu's mom anymore. And you may think this is trivial, but it's a part of how Korean society forces women into a role and makes them lose themselves in the process.
Men sometimes father children and don't find out until years after the fact. Wish I could fucking do that. Men being the default doesn't just screw over women, it screws over men too. Men who want to be attentive fathers, gay men who want to adopt, trans men who have to battle with a medical system that does not cater to them when pregnant. And speaking of the system...
Apologies from my tongue, never yours, busy lapping from flowing cups. Stabbing with your fork. I know you're a smart man. I know you're a smart man. And weaponize the false incompetence. It's dominance under guise.
This one ties into that whole men are the default thing too, but I think it illustrates the tip of the iceberg when it comes to how abandoned by the system we are as well. BMI still doesn't account for women's bodies. BMI is not and has never been an accurate measure of health among men, but it's even worse for women. The idea that there's some magical universal ideal weight, despite race, age, diet, gender, and genetics, is already ridiculous, but it becomes even more so when you realize just how unscientific it is. BMI was created by a Belgian mathematician for a census in the early 1800s. He drew from a sample pool of almost exclusively white upper-class men, and he wasn't looking for health so much as he was trying to discover a kind of median weight, and noticed weight generally went up when the height percentile went up. Doesn't sound revolutionary now, but it was probably fairly new ground back then. Over 100 years later, it was followed up by a new study in order to update the BMI system. That is with very heavy air quotes.
It only measured 7,426 healthy men from 12 sample groups. They included American students and professionals, Italian railway workers, men from East and West Finland, Japanese farmers and fishermen, and Bantu men from South Africa, which the study itself says could not be suggested to be a representative sample of Bantu men in general.
Once again, mostly white men, some Japanese, and some African, but not even close to a large enough pool to state a median weight for the planet. So not only is the BMI definitely racist, you'll notice women aren't mentioned there at all. That's because it just doesn't take us into account. Despite our different anatomy and balance of hormones, the BMI has just been placing the weight averages of white European men against us and then calling us obese when we don't fit into it. Black women are the most screwed over in this deal, but women of all races are being left behind when it comes to studying supposed healthy weights. There is a serious lack of money and research that goes into so-called women's issues. Menopause has been studied more in recent years, and every new piece of information that comes out about it shows it to be an even more intense and damaging experience than previously thought. We have very little study on what to actually do about it though. HRT is the only consistently recommended treatment for severe symptoms. Yeah, that's right, HRT is for cis people too. But other than that, it's a lot of consider lifestyle changes or try cognitive behavioral therapy. A lot of the medication currently able to be prescribed for menopausal issues, like hot flashes or pain, can have really severe side effects. Pregnancy studies have a similar problem, and if you want more information on that, I'd highly recommend watching this Leftist Cooks video, where Sarah goes into great detail about the dearth of safe studies surrounding pregnancy. So many women's issues and diseases that skew female are still somehow incurable and unknowable, despite half the population potentially being susceptible. Part of that is because women weren't even included in most medical studies until 1993, as women's bodies were considered outliers when it came to research, to the point of not even testing female mice in case it interfered with results due to hormonal changes. By outliers, they meant it was too hard. Chloe Bird, a professor at Pardee Rand Graduate School, stated, cardiovascular disease, for example, is the #1 killer of women in the USA, but only about a third of participants in clinical trials for new treatments for cardiovascular disease are female. The other issue is that issues that disproportionately affect women are massively underfunded. These graphs show the gender disparity between the burden and issue causes, with orange being proportionally female issues and blue being male. And this second graph shows the stark difference when sorted by funding. If they were being studied proportionally to their effect on the population, those dots shouldn't have moved.
Migraine, headaches, endometriosis, and anxiety disorders, for example, which disproportionately affect women, all attract much less funding in proportion to the burden they exert on the US population than do other conditions. The degree of underfunding or overfunding is different for the groups of conditions too. On average, female-dominant diseases that are underfunded are more severely so. For chronic fatigue syndrome, also known as myalgic encephalomyelitis, for example, the ratio of burden to funding is 0.04. For HIV/AIDS, the ratio is 15.6.
Now, am I saying that we should stop funding HIV and AIDS research? Fucking no, obviously. In fact, it's an absolute miracle it's even got that much funding now, considering the way the government labelled it as a gay person's disease and treated anybody who had it as a pariah and let them die in droves. But this isn't a video about that. This even applies to cancer. A study of data from the US National Cancer Institute over a decade showed that gynecological cancers are vastly undertreated when accounting for lethality. Across the 19 most prevalent forms of cancer, ovarian cancer ranks 5th for lethality, but 12th in terms of its funding to lethality ratio. Cervical cancer follows a similar trend. Illnesses that affect majority women are seemingly always treated as a fucking mystery in the medical field. Endometriosis, polycystic ovary syndrome, most rheumatic conditions, anemia, chronic fatigue syndrome, Graves' disease, POTS, almost 80% of autoimmune conditions, EDS, Hashimoto's disease, lipedema, polymyalgia, and fibromyalgia are all conditions that are either disproportionately diagnosed in women or affect women more severely than men. And in the case of some of them, only affect women. When my friend Abby told me her doctor thought she might have POTS, I asked what the treatment would be. She said beta blockers or a service dog, maybe both. I googled POTS to check treatment for it, and it came up with there is no cure for POTS, but there are lifestyle changes, etc. And I read it out loud to my mum, and I said, what's the bet that POTS is a disease that primarily women get? And she said it sounded highly likely, so I scrolled 1 inch, and it said, the majority of people with POTS are women and people assigned female at birth, aged 15 to 50 years. I told my mum, and she deadpanned shocking at me, because we're so used to this by now. Me and my sister both get debilitating migraines. Abby has EDS on top of her POTS. My friend Elsa has Graves. My love Lizette has fibro and lipedema. My mum has arthritis. My friend Charlie has autoimmune issues. More than one girl I know has CFS. Half the women in my life have endo or PCOS. I might have fibromyalgia or CFS or another mystery condition, but I don't know for sure, and my quality of life gets worse every day. I made a whole video on it last year, which is outdated now, but accurately reflects a great deal of my interaction with medical professionals. At least in Australia, I am able to get an appointment where my doctor takes me seriously, which is a huge privilege that not a lot of women get access to. I know I didn't in the UK. I am fucking angry. Anybody who follows me on YouTube will know that I've been having health problems for the last 18 plus months, and that in the last 6 months I've been going to the doctor to try and get those sorted out. This meant that about 10 or 11 weeks ago, I got a blood test for the first time. Now, I have a phobia of needles, so that was something that was really hard for me to work up to. It took a lot of energy. Like, after I had been given the sheet of paper that was like, you need a blood test, it took me 3 additional weeks after that before I managed to book it and go, because I was so unbelievably stressed about it, right? That blood test came back with like anemia, low iron, low vitamin D, and low thyroid, which are all bad. I had a male doctor tell me that that was because of my period. It's not. But that's his theory. So he gave me iron supplements, vitamin D supplements for 8 weeks and told me to get a blood test again in 8 weeks. So I finished those prescriptions 2 weeks ago and only booked the blood test the week that I finished the prescriptions, which was a mistake because blood tests are full at the moment. So it took an additional 2 weeks after that to get the second blood test. I got it on Friday, hated it, was very stressed, had a panic attack, not a good time. And I've just now got the email back, the text message back from my GP about my blood test results. Your anemia has resolved on recent bloods, but it was too soon to recheck iron levels and vitamin D. This has to be a minimum of 12 weeks. Please request another blood form if you wish to get these repeated. I'm fucking sorry? I'm sorry. I just got a blood test that I didn't need to get because it's not going to tell me any new information. This is the blood test I was prescribed and told to do because my prescription only went for 8 weeks for the new supplements I'm taking.
I'm so angry. I'm so fucking fed up. I don't need extra blood tests, and the system doesn't need me getting extra blood tests. The system is strangling as it is. The system doesn't need me going in for pointless fucking appointments that make me stressed and miserable. I'm so fucking fed up, man. I'm so done. I'm so tired of being ill, and I'm so tired of being treated by the system like an inconvenience. Like I'm just literally like a cog in the machine. I'm so tired of capitalism and conservatism and the fucking Tories decimating the NHS. We had one of the most revolutionary health systems in the world, and they have run it directly into the ground. I'm so tired, and I'm so fed up. I'm so done. I really can't do this anymore, man. I really had enough.
But even with that access to healthcare, I still don't know what I have. And even if it is those things, there isn't any solid treatment for any of them. I've been taking supplements for 6 months, and I don't feel any better. I've been on antidepressants to see if that'd help. It didn't. And now I'm taking amitriptyline to sleep, which is the only thing that seems to have made any difference in the chronic fatigue part, but it's also causing a whole host of side effects, including rapid weight gain, excessive sweating, hand tremors, and muscle twitches. So I should probably stop taking it. Which means I'm back to square one as far as treating the fatigue part. That's not even getting started on the muscles. It feels like every day my body gets harder to use and takes longer to recover. Brain fog comes and goes, but the muscle pain is constant and everywhere. I've also recently developed carpal tunnel syndrome, which I realized I developed as I was writing the script, so it's not in there. And my issues aren't even close to isolated. My mum's cousin had a mystery illness for 15 years and went through multiple specialists before they figured out what it was, and she'll never live a normal life. My aunt has MS, and she'll be living in fear of it worsening for the rest of her life. The NHS fails women constantly, and the US healthcare system basically throws them in the garbage. On top of this, while mental health statistics might be skewed in women's favor due to men being less likely to seek diagnosis, stress quite literally affects women differently than men.
Though stress is disadvantageous for both men and women, adding insult to injury, stress can hurt women more than men when it comes to fertility. When chronically stressed, our body enters the fight or flight mode, halting essential functions and causing gut imbalances. Stress causes our cortisol to spike, which, again, isn't good for anyone's health overall. However, while men have cortisol, their testosterone doesn't come from it. Women, on the other hand, primarily use the hormones progesterone and cortisol to conceive children. Cortisol is not bad, but when stress causes it to swell, everything else is imbalanced. Even if a woman doesn't intend to have children, she'll still be hurt by high cortisol with depression, anxiety, and mood swings, among other things.
Men might be more likely to die at their own hand when attempting to shuffle off this mortal coil, but if women don't succeed, the universe might shove us off it anyway. But sure, let's talk more about the male loneliness crisis and how nobody understands how hard it all is for you. Not all men, but also not all women are allowed to make decisions about their body without their partners or imaginary future partners being taken into account. My friends with extremely painful conditions like PCOS and endo can't get hysterectomies because they're too young and might change their mind about kids. As Etienne Navarro pointed out on Twitter, I was 42 years old when I was refused a hysterectomy. The reasons? 1, I might want more children. I had a teenager and 2 under 5s. Are you mad? 2, my husband might want more children. Nope, he's had the snip. 3, I might meet another man who wants children. I was 42 and married for 20 years. How quickly would I need to divorce my husband, find another man, and like him enough to want his children? Number 4, I might change my mind. Hell no. Read answers 1, 2, and 3 again. Reasons given related to my health? 0. Humans I know, personally, once asked if they had a male partner, were told they had to bring that partner to appointments to get their opinion too. That shit happened in 2023. AFAB people are less likely to receive painkillers or sedatives even when scoring on a similar or worse pain scale than men. Also, there's this colloquial wisdom that male patients with women who made them come in should be taken seriously because their wives or girlfriends are trusted to know when it's serious for them, versus female patients not being believed about themselves. Women supposedly having a higher pain tolerance should actually make these statistics the opposite, because if we're so strong, then when we admit to pain, we should be trusted immediately. But for some mysterious reason, our pain is consistently doubted by the system. It's misogyny. Misogyny is also the reason for the whole higher pain tolerance thing, because once again, we don't actually have enough usable data to confirm it either way, because so many studies exclude women, because they assume hormonal changes will skew the results. Even if they do, shouldn't we be testing how hormonal changes affect pain tolerance? This is even worse for black women due to the history of racism in medicine that was used to justify the inhumane treatment of black people throughout history. Many physicians throughout history believed that black people could be operated on without anesthetic and were insensible to pain when subjected to punishment, which is not only obviously untrue, it also led to the disabling and deaths of thousands of black people. Unfortunately, this trend, while not as overt in medical circles anymore, is still clearly in practice. Black women in particular die in childbirth anywhere between 2 and 4 times the rate of non-black women. They're also significantly more likely to have preterm births. Overall, they get less comprehensive care, are believed less, and are more likely to suffer under our current medical system than almost any other demographic besides trans people. And let's use that depressing fact to springboard into the only thing right-wing men care about where women are concerned. Fertility! Yeah, we're going to talk about it. To start with, did you know that STDs disproportionately affect women worse than men? I'll bet you that most women knew that, and most men didn't. A significant number of STIs can cause fertility issues and permanent damage to women's bodies. Even HIV, which is, as previously mentioned, a disease that primarily affects men, appears to affect women in significant ways. HIV-infected women may be at increased risk for medical problems and metabolic changes. Studies have shown that HIV-positive women were more likely to develop genital warts and cervical intraepithelial neoplasia and were at increased risk for viral infections. According to one study, HIV-positive women were 80% more likely to be anemic than HIV-positive men. Compared with HIV-negative controls, women with HIV were more likely to have elevated triglycerides and insulin levels and decreased bone mineral density. So many illnesses can cause fertility issues. And then, even if you get pregnant, it doesn't mean you'll have an easy go of it. In Australia, more than 1 in 6 women who gave birth were diagnosed with gestational diabetes. Pregnancy can raise your risk of heart problems, clots, and sepsis. It can cause preeclampsia, hemorrhaging, strokes, and a whole host of issues caused during or after delivery, whether you deliver via cesarean or naturally. Not to mention that miscarriages can be fatal.
A study led by Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health researchers estimates that infant deaths in Texas increased more than expected in the year following the state's 2021 ban on abortion in early pregnancy, especially among infants with congenital anomalies. The Texas law prohibiting abortions after a fetal heartbeat could be detected as early as 5 or 6 weeks went into effect September 1st, 2021. At this time, the law, Senate Bill 8, or SB 8, was the most stringent state abortion law in the country. It did not allow exemptions for congenital anomalies. The researchers' analysis of monthly death certificate data in Texas and the rest of the United States found that between 2021 and 2022, infant deaths in Texas rose from 1,985 to 2,240, a year-over-year increase of 255 deaths. This corresponds to a 12.9% increase in infant deaths in Texas versus a 1.8% increase in infant deaths in the rest of the US. During the same period, the study defines infants as under 12 months old.
Lack of access to abortion kills us. And if it doesn't succeed at that, it can leave us dealing with the ramifications of not receiving care early enough for the rest of our lives. Yet, we're constantly spoken down to about our decision to have or not have children. Plenty of women have said that they'll refuse to have kids now that Trump is going to be president, because they don't trust that the system will protect them. Not because of disagreeing about politics, but because their lives are on the line. In fact, some women are told to have kids to fix symptoms of other conditions. Never mind that the kinds of conditions that might be fixed by pregnancy usually lead to high-risk pregnancies, which might be worse than your current condition, but some of them are only fixed for the 9 months you're carrying a child. In which case, what are you supposed to do? Just keep getting pregnant every year until menopause? That's completely unsustainable and feels highly ethically questionable, and yet I know numerous women who have had this recommended to them by medical practitioners. Hey men, if, in order to fix testicular torsion, you were told to stretch your dick for 9 months and then repeatedly slam it into a car door, would that be a good suggestion? Do you think? Oh, also, the car door in question is a Cybertruck, and you're at higher risk of developing diabetes or throwing a clot if you do it. Still good? We've all seen the clip of Nick Fuentes cackling over the Trump victory because he knows it will make life harder for marginalized people, especially women. So if you don't want to see it again, skip to here.
Hey, we control your bodies. Guess what? Guys win again, okay? Men win again. And yes, we control your bodies. It's your body, my choice. And men win again. Men win again. We will keep you down forever. You will never control your own bodies. Never gonna happen, sweetie. Your body, our choice.
The phrase, your body, my choice, has had a 4,600% spike online in the week following the election. Men have become brazen in their desire to own women instead of just like being fucking normal. Seriously, try being normal for like a month. You'll not only have a better time, but you will stop contributing to the fascist decline we're currently in. Your body, my choice, is so evil. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. It is evil. If you don't believe me, would you say it to anybody else? If a gay man said it to you, how would that make you feel? Threatened, right? This disgusting phrase has now become so widespread that it has broken the bounds of the internet. Children in schools have started saying it. Women are property to these people. We're incubators, and we matter less than our ability to produce a viable heir from their seed. That's how gross they are. Your body, my choice, is something we're just supposed to put up with, but men start crying when we make kill all men jokes. Women have been dealing with rape and murder threats for hundreds, if not thousands of years, which have only seemed to worsen over the last 5 because people are getting far too comfortable posting that shit and saying it out loud. But if we joke about men being bad, we're not doing enough outreach to men. Do you see how that is a ridiculous double standard? Speaking of,
if we had a daughter, I'd watch and could not save her. The emotional torture from the head of your high table. She'd do what you told her. She'd meet the same cruel fate. So now I've got to run so I can undo this mistake. At least I've got to try.
We'll start with the obvious. Men aren't supposed to be monogamous, but if a woman isn't a virgin before she meets him, she's a chewed up piece of gum. Obviously. If every woman you meet has to be a virgin, but you're supposed to sleep with as many people as possible to gain clout, that's bad maths. You're gonna run out of women pretty quickly, and then you'll have to start sleeping with each other, and we all know you're not willing to do that. Also, if you want a woman who knows what she's doing, she might need some practice. I know y'all aren't good at it on the first try. Women are expected to be perfect, and when one isn't, she is dogpiled. But when men are exposed for serial abuse, there's always a, now hang on, hear me out, about it in the public eye. I've already got a whole nother video about Chapel Roan in the works, watch this space, but to cover it briefly, it has been fascinating and aggravating to watch the way the press reacts to a woman who is unwilling to put up with bad behavior. When she refuses to take people's shit, when she snaps back, when she discusses how damaging her sudden fame has been to not only her mental health, but her safety, the repeated refrain that she isn't fit for showbiz is parroted over and over again. Arguably, somebody who doesn't lie down and take it whenever she's trodden on is more suited for showbiz than anybody else. But what do I know?
Not me, bitch. You tell him, girl.
On the other side of the coin, it seems that whenever men behave badly or are struggling in the face of the industry, it ignites a new conversation about mental health. I'm not saying any of those men don't deserve those conversations. Kurt Cobain, Tom Holland, Pete Davidson, Pete Wentz, Kid Cudi, Prince Harry, John Mulaney, hell, even Kanye before all the third right stuff. They all deserved to have their mental health and safety prioritized. But women are frequently not afforded this same consideration. Think of all of the women who have broken down over the years who were ostracized as crazy or hot messes or divas. Britney Spears, Lindsay Lohan, Amanda Bynes, Demi Lovato, Amy Winehouse, Princess Diana, Winona Ryder, Sean Young, Kesha, Whitney Houston, Marilyn Monroe. The list goes on and on, because the media loves nothing more than reporting on a woman's downfall. Amanda Bynes is still a laughingstock. Lindsay Lohan is only just getting her career back on track. Winona Ryder was blacklisted from the industry for years because she shoplifted. Hard to remember now, but it's true. Britney Spears became a meme because of her breakdown. And actually, I have something to say about that.
The doll people are not men, we are made of ass and glass. Skin is clay and painted blue, our head can detach. We are statues with a pulse. We are art you can...
Women aren't whole beings in the eyes of the media or the world. We're something to look at. And when we melt down or change our looks or act in a way that isn't for male consumption, we are punished for it. My university dissertation was on this exact topic because I had noticed a trend of men exploiting women even after their deaths. My dissertation sets out to explore the male gaze on female tragedy and the dehumanization of the female identity in suffering in the public consciousness under the mainstream male view. This thesis was inspired by the photograph of Evelyn McHale, most commonly referred to as the most beautiful suicide. After a student photographer took a snapshot of her dead body on the compacted roof of a car only 4 minutes after she jumped from the top of the Empire State Building. The first line of her suicide note was, "I don't want anyone in or out of my family to see any part of me. Could you destroy my body by cremation?" And this sentiment was not only not respected, but completely ignored. The student sold the photo to magazines, and it is still circulated to this day, found on album covers and as art prints available for sale.
Somewhat ironically, when I uploaded this video, the shortened version of this video, the video got flagged for showing imagery of suicide because I didn't sufficiently distort or cover up one of the images. And I got an email from YouTube basically being like, you violated our community guideline, and a separate email being like, also, if you're mentally ill and you're in danger of killing yourself, like, we have resources to help. And it's funny because that's hilarious. But it's also funny because that's a piece of art. Remember? Isn't that a piece of art? Isn't it? The rest of you sure seem to think so for 80 years. But no, when I'm pointing out how it isn't art, and it actually is a horrible depiction of a real person, and I'm using the image in that example, then all of a sudden it's not art. Then all of a sudden we're talking about a real person. And I agree, she is a real person and you should be treating her with respect instead of banding that photo around. But like, do you see the irony?
Female tragedy is historically seen as either something beautiful or as something to add to and fuel male tragedy and personal development. But it is rarely authentically depicted in media. In response to my thesis, I created a series of vignettes portraying different perspectives of the deaths of 3 women: Evelyn McHale, Sylvia Plath, and Marilyn Monroe. I have chosen to express their voices in a way that counters their previous depiction under the male gaze, such as Evelyn McHale's dying wish not to be seen, Sylvia Plath's narrative being written over by her husband following her suicide, and Marilyn Monroe's treatment throughout her lifetime and the sensationalization of her death. Princess Di was treated so egregiously as public property that the press quite literally caused her death. Ever since then, the royal wives are public property. See Kate's disappearance and the flurry around it, only for it to be due to receiving cancer treatment, or the way Meghan Markle was completely ostracized from the royal family for not conforming to their idea of what a real woman should be, because she's divorced, not white, and an actress. And because she wasn't willing to contort herself to fit into that mold. We are expected to take abuse with our heads held high, and if we ever buckle or break, the media pounces. Britney Spears wrote about the reactions to her famously publicized meltdown, in which she shaved her hair off in full view of the paparazzi.
I'd been eyeballed so much growing up. I'd been looked up and down, had people telling me what they thought of my body since I was a teenager. I went into a hair salon and I took the clippers and I shaved off all my hair. Everyone thought it was hilarious. Look how crazy she is. Even my parents acted embarrassed by me. But nobody seemed to understand that I was simply out of my mind with grief. My children had been taken away from me. With my head shaved, everyone was scared of me, even my mom. No one would talk to me anymore because I was too ugly. My long hair was a big part of what people liked. I knew that. I knew a lot of guys thought long hair was hot. Shaving my head was a way of saying to the world, fuck you. You want me to be pretty for you? Fuck you. You want me to be good for you? Fuck you. You want me to be your dream girl? Fuck you. I'd been the good girl for years. I'd smiled politely while TV show hosts leered at my breasts, while American parents said I was destroying their children by wearing a crop top, while executives patted my hand condescendingly and second-guessed my career choices even though I'd sold millions of records, while my family acted like I was evil. And I was tired of it.
Shaving your head shouldn't be a radical act. But when women do it without trying to make it pretty, it's either seen as done to undermine the patriarchy because of the direct repudiation of misogynistic ideals, or it's seen as a sign of mental infirmity, a la Britney. The history of head shaving is an interesting one. Hair is intrinsically tied into a lot of cultures' versions of gender expression. Some don't allow women to show their hair in public at all, so letting your hair down is a revolutionary act. Some cultures expect a level of attention and grooming paid to the hair to ensure it looks presentable, and it's often been portrayed as a symbol of power or weakness, such as in the story of Samson. Medusa had snakes for hair as a symbol of her monstrosity, but also of her power and agency. Black women's hair is heavily policed by white supremacist ideals of femininity, so black feminism usually advocates for bigger, natural hair or dreadlocks, while for white women, being able to cut their hair at all was originally considered radical. And when the 20s bob came around, it was originally a huge scandal. Imagine it being a scandal, that you can cut your hair up to your chin. In Afghanistan, the secret practice of disguising girls as boys to ensure their freedom and family status is known as bacha posh. The first step in turning an Afghan girl into a bacha posh is a haircut. Hair is so tied into womanhood that many women are anxious to get it cut or dyed at all, for fear of changing it too much and losing their connection to their own identity and femininity. Women on America's Next Top Model who had their heads shaved frequently burst into tears. Being bald is stigmatized among women, largely because it's seen as a rejection of the cultural hegemony, an act of defeminization, or as a sign of illness. Frida Kahlo painted a self-portrait with a shaved head after her divorce from Diego Rivera. Rose McGowan shaved her head during the Me Too movement. Vivienne Westwood shaved her head in protest against climate change. Women sometimes shave their heads in solidarity with their cancer-suffering friends. Different waves of feminism have advocated for different kinds of autonomy related to hair. Second wave, and its resulting political lesbianism, championed growing body hair out to make yourself undesirable to men. You've probably seen similar headlines in the wake of Trump's election from women protesting the "Your Body, My Choice" crowd by shaving their heads and attempting to make themselves as quote-unquote ugly and undesirable to men as possible. But again, that's complicated. Bald women are already subject to stigma by society, whether recovering from chemo or suffering from alopecia, and leaning into that stigma might not be the most progressive choice. When those women have fought to feel pretty despite the hair loss that is out of their control, labeling baldness as undesirable can be extremely hurtful. Plus, there are the racial connotations. Julia Fox proclaimed she dyed her eyebrows yellow as man repellent, and that men hate her now that she's not catering to the male gaze.
Men hate my outfits. They're so mad that I'm not hot like how I was in Uncut Gems. I hear that all the time.
And there is some truth in that. TikTok trends such as man-repellent makeup or anti-male gaze makeup and anti-male gaze clothes go semi-viral every few months, with the primary goal being that you look approachable to women, but men will leave you alone. But how much of it is based on bucking Eurocentric beauty standards? And why is it a statement when white women allow themselves to be ugly as an act of rebellion?
So the real question is, who gets to be ugly? Because as a black woman, there has been plenty of messaging in my lifetime that has told me I am already ugly. And sure, I can define and reclaim ugly for myself, but not in the same way Julia Fox can. Looking undesirable for black women in the way Fox professes comes at a societal cost with harsher penalties.
But even black women have used baldness as a way to book this idea of ugliness in misogynoir and find their own peace with it. Solange Knowles shaved her head because she wanted to be free from the bondage that black women sometimes put on themselves with hair. In an interview with InStyle, Amanda Stenberg talked about their hair journey.
At first I had a very big curly fro that kind of became a symbol of my self-acceptance. It was me loving my blackness. It was the hair growing out of my head, so there was nothing wrong with that. As soon as I got tired of that look being my identity, I cut my hair shorter. I was curious how that might affect people's perception of my gender too, so I kept cutting it shorter and shorter. I wanted a hairstyle that felt less feminine.
Willow Smith and Skin from Skunk Anansi have also referenced similar pressures from misogynoir and wanting to liberate themselves from the pressures that come with their appearance being scrutinized. And in her book, I'll Never Write My Memoirs, Grace Jones referred to her own shaved look and how empowering it felt to her.
I liked how having it short was a threat to people because it made me look so confrontational. It made me look hard, in a soft world. It made me look more like a thing than a person, but that was how I had felt I was treated growing up, as a thing, without feeling, an object, not even human.
In an interview with Nylon in 2016, Halsey talked about her biracial identity and how shaving her head affected her.
Hair has also been a big indicator of racial issues in my life. It's one of the ultimate symbolic struggles for women of color. Shaving my head was important to me because I needed to be able to prove that I could still love myself if I did it.
Since the election results, American women are starting to shave their heads explicitly to become less desirable to men, harkening back to the 4B movement in South Korea, which has gained attention this year on TikTok and Twitter. The 4B movement aims to de-center men in the lives of women and refers to the 4 Bs. B kind of meaning no. Bionne, no dating. Bisexu, no sex. Bihon, no marriage. And bichusan, no childbirth. South Korea has a frankly horrendous track record when it comes to women's rights. But even calling yourself a feminist in Korea is liable to get you labeled as crazy, because they see radical feminism as terrorism. Members of the 4B movement are derogatorily referred to as peminyon, femi bitches. And that's not an old thing, that's happening now. You can create feminist art and perform feminist actions as long as you don't call yourself one and try to get legislation pushed. Then they'll push you out of the spotlight. I love South Korea. I'd like to move there one day, but not at the moment. It's not overly safe at the moment. Femicide and intimate partner violence is also a concern in the country. The Korea Times reported at least 138 women were killed by male partners last year, and a further 311 survived attempts on their lives by their intimate partners. There were more than 57,000 cases of dating violence in 2021, according to the National Police Agency, tripling the previous year's figure. I have my issues with the 4B movement, in the same way I take issues with second-wave feminism's political lesbianism, which is that it often strays too far and ends up legitimizing turfism as feminism, which, to be clear, it isn't. It's just misogyny in a different hat. Online forums like WOMAD are the most guilty of this, and unfortunately they are a rather loud voice in the movement. Policing how trans women look in order to clock or out them is disgustingly trans-misogynistic, and also just regularly misogynistic, because we're then playing into the idea that in order to look like a woman, you have to meet certain attributes. Oh, you have a naturally square jaw? Not woman enough. You have excess hair on your face due to PCOS? No, you're secretly a man in disguise, and we hate you. You don't conform to the very rigid patriarchal ideas of what womanhood is? You're disgusting, and we hate you. It's not great. Like, I see where it's coming from. I really do. But you've got to be very careful not to let it stray too far. Shucking the shackles of femininity can be revolutionary, but only if we're embracing those more masculine traits as equally beautiful and empowering as the feminine ones.
I think an interesting addition to the idea that women have to look feminine and pretty in order to be taken seriously in business roles or leadership roles is when that Maori member of parliament did the haka in response to a bill that would be removing constitutional rights of the Maori people. And while whenever people outside of New Zealand see the haka, there is always an outpouring of extremely racist commentary, this particular video seemed to incite an awful lot of specifically misogynistic commentary. People saying that, like, while they didn't usually hate the haka, seeing her do it was unwomanly or gross or worse in some way. There's one woman who commented saying that, like, when women do it, it's scary. And it's like, yeah, that's the point. When men do it, it should also be scary. It's a war cry. Like, what are you talking about? But there is the fact that there was this additional level of disgust placed onto the haka because the person initiating it was a young, pretty woman.
Annie Lennox and Sinead O'Connor both famously shaved their heads in order to not only avoid being sexualized, but also to have their artistic talent taken more seriously, because people would focus less on their looks and more on their music. And there's some merit behind that. Women tend to be taken less seriously by men, and even other women, when they're conventionally attractive. Don't believe me? Ask Madison Nicole, known online as
Gigglypuff,
a Harvard Psychology and Computer Sciences graduate whose entire Twitter presence revolves around men not believing she could possibly have graduated without bribery or selling her own body to achieve it. Even when she posts proof, men are still desperate to undermine her because she's extremely pretty and blonde. Men in general are convinced they could beat women at things those women are skilled at. See the sheer number of "I could thrash her" comments about Serena Williams, female football players like Megan Rapinoe, WNBA players.
No, it was the NBA. Oh. I'm being told it's like the WNBA, but all dudes.
Like Lauren Jackson or Caitlin Clark, or the story of Billie Jean King.
Eureka, Billie Jean!
It's Bobby Riggs. Listen, I had a great idea.
Male chauvinist pig versus hairy-legged feminist. No offense.
You're still a feminist, right?
I'm a tennis player who happens to be a woman.
Don't hang up.
And by the way, I shave my legs.
But when it comes to academia, the level of vitriol against women is genuinely horrific. Women are frequently placed later on research papers, regardless of whether they headed them or not. But the biggest example of this that I can think of is writer Tara Moss. She was a model for years before she started publishing crime novels in the early 2000s, starting her modeling career when she was barely a teenager. When she first started releasing novels, there was a healthy dose of skepticism surrounding the authorship of those books. Because how on earth could a model be smart enough to write? In her own words from her amazing autobiography, The Fictional Woman, Moss recounts,
"The year is 2002. I am 28 years old, and I am sitting in a small, unfamiliar hotel room hooked up to a lie detector machine. Standing over me is a journalist from the Australian newspaper. Across the table is a professional polygraph examiner, a former Victorian police officer who normally tests suspected pedophiles, rapists, and killers. He is testing me to see whether or not I actually write my own books. I worked as a photographic and catwalk model in North America, Europe, and Australia before quitting at age 25 and publishing my debut crime novel. 2.5 years later, as my second novel hits the shelves, the book itself has seemingly been overshadowed by a more compelling mystery: how a model-turned-author, as I'm frequently dubbed in the press, could possibly write a book. The rumors abound that my novels are heavily edited, that my boyfriends wrote them for me, that I employed a ghostwriter, that they are plagiarized. But the truth is, I have written every day since I was a child, and I have spent hours every day for years now plotting, researching, writing, editing, and laboring over my novels. The rumors are false, but without a strong public voice, social media has yet to exist, I have very little means to defend myself.
She wasn't believed simply because she had to be too dumb and beautiful, because it's a universally acknowledged truth that girls who are pretty aren't allowed to be smart. Smart women are looked down on even if they're not conventionally attractive, but if they dare to be pretty, they'll be discounted entirely. Yet, if a woman isn't pretty enough, she's automatically spurned from speaking up, so it's a lose-lose either way. I've shaved my head before, more than once, and for the last 4 years, I'm always in some state of regrowing it. The first time was in the middle of the COVID lockdown, when I felt that my hair was suffocating, to the point that I wrote a poem about it, and then cut it off in its entirety.
It's 2007 and Britney Spears has shaved off all her hair. She shaved her head and picked a fight with a car. It's 2007 and you were a child or a teenager or something in between and you don't know what it means. It's 2007 and a crazy woman wielding a green umbrella is funny, but only if you're not paying enough attention. Don't worry. No one is paying attention. Every day you brush your hair and every day it knots. Once in a while you try something different, but most days you leave it be. You're getting tireder. You don't know when the exhaustion started, but you have a suspicion it was sometime after 2007. Not that it matters. Nothing matters. Maybe you shouldn't even bother to brush your hair. You brush it anyway. It hasn't rained in a while and you miss the breaks in the madness, or maybe it's the time, or maybe it's both and they're the same thing holding different coloured umbrellas. Over a decade passes. You're 20 or maybe 30 or something else entirely, and you want to shave your head and pick a fight with a car. You want to wield a green umbrella like a sword and batter away your madness. Everything is too hard. Days and nights and breathing, having hair that soaks and dries and knots and unties. It's suffocating. You're trapped in the life. You have no choice but to live. You submit to being known. You submit. You want to shave your head and pick a fight with a car. Your car has done nothing wrong, but neither has your hair. You want to punish them both anyway. You're so tired. You don't own an umbrella.
I was sick of it all. Not just because of womanhood, but because of the Sisyphean task of taking care of myself during one of the most mentally taxing periods of recent history. Living with less hair is easier. I've loved having relatively short hair ever since. I'm not sure I'll ever go back to the almost waist-length locks I had in high school. Sure, the middle stages of growing it out are always annoying, but way less annoying than the extremely thick locks I used to have in the middle of summer, constantly having to detangle knots and redo ponytails over and over again because bits fell into my eyes or over my neck. I look at pictures of myself with that hair and I don't recognize myself.
I hate to say it, I hope I don't sound ridiculous. I don't know who this man is. I mean, he could be walking down the street, I wouldn't know a thing. Sorry to this man.
The hair is overtaking me. I'm not owning it. Now I feel like it's just an extension of my personality. It also gives me more license to mess with it. Before I shaved it, I dyed it once or twice, from blonde to red to brown to red to blonde, and then finally started putting blues and purples on the ends, but afterwards it's been hot pink, blue, purple, green, faded pink, half and half, rainbow, and black. As some of those other women voiced, it gave me more freedom. Not just from the societal pressure to look a certain way, but also of expression. I had more options. Some looks were more feminine than others, and as a largely femme-presenting agender person, that was usually what I leaned towards, but only because it's more fun. I see womanhood as performing drag, and if you want more information on that, I have a whole video about it. Right here. Masculine looks are sexy on other people, but I find them unappealing on my own features, largely because I'm not conventionally attractive. Also, if I skew too androgynous or masculine, I look like my father, and that makes me want to commit seppuku. Shaving my head didn't make me uglier, but there are men out there who think it does. And that's the real problem. Bald men like Andrew Tate are out there crying and shaking and screaming and throwing up at women who don't want him to look at them. I don't look hot for him, or any man. I look hot for me. Shaving my head was queer joy. It was a moment shared among friends I rarely got to see in person because of the lockdown. It brought me closer to figuring out who I was. I highly recommend that everybody tries it, at least once. Shaving our heads shouldn't be to become less desirable. It should be to become more desirable to ourselves, to our friends, to the people that matter. We should be making buzz cuts and baldness sexy, regardless of gender presentation. We should be using it as an act of sisterhood to those who can't grow hair, or to those who have lost it. Do it for fun, for the men with receding hairlines, for the trans men who are insecure about losing hair, for the trans women who don't pass according to a stupid Eurocentric patriarchal standard of what femininity is, for the burgeoning queer girls who want short hair but aren't brave enough to take that step yet, for the straight girls to see that there are other options outside of who they're supposed to grow into, for those women who must cover their hair in public or risk being brutalized or imprisoned. There are a million reasons to shave your head, but the first one should always be you. Do it for you. But being bald can be feminine and sexy just as much as it can be a rebellion of the patriarchy. Here, I'll show you.
The dull people are quiet. What is there to say? Art does not interpret itself. There are men with a day to save. We are paintings with legs. We are art you can...
See what I did for this channel? Like and subscribe.